Thank you, Gerard. That was awesome. I had some great takeaways, and I'm sure the audience did as well. My name is Sukumar Iyer. I'm the CEO of Brilliant Corporation, also the industry chair for the ACT-IAC Intelligent Automation Working Group. I'll be talking more about the working group later, so I won't bore you with that. But our next presenters have an awesome story to tell. It is a story of how an agency gets started on their automation journey. And I would say three things came together for them beautifully. The first, they were willing to embrace innovation and look at new ideas. Second, they found a wonderful problem to solve. And third, they had executive sponsorship from Harrison Smith, mainly the Deputy Chief Procurement Officer. So Tim Shaughnessy is a senior program analyst at the Internal Revenue Service. I have found him to be a very inspiring and innovative leader. He is a fan of the Minnesota Twins, but last night he was cheering for the Nats. So go Nats. Kiran Gulapalli is a vice president at Anika Systems. And Kiran is a voracious reader, and I couldn't help thinking he's soon going to be building a bot so that the bot can do some of his reading for him. So it's my pleasure to introduce Tim Shaughnessy from the Internal Revenue Service and Kiran Gulapalli from Anika Systems.
Well, thank you, Sukumar, and thank you to ACT-IAC and all the sponsors for letting us speak for a few minutes. It's interesting. Sukumar talked about the game last night, and as I'm texting among friends and talking about analyzing the game, you start to look at. I think we had 15 or 20 texts going back and forth about balls and strikes, right? And they talk about the umpiring officiating crew last night and how the fellow behind the plate, based on how he scored out, right, the metrics for the year, he got the job of Game 7 behind the plate. And then quickly you see, I'm always amazed, you start looking at every year, it's almost the game within the game, what are new graphics are going to come out. And I'm just amazed this year as they show, sorry, non-baseball fans, but as they show the slider, and the curve and the changeup and then the fastball, and overlay all of them and how they're coming across the plate and the spin rate, right, and launch angle and all the other metrics. But we had the debate, and I said about 12:30. I sat back and said, boy, I got to speak about our bot tomorrow. What would happen? They talk about putting that computer back behind the plate. I said, geez, what would I have debated about for the last 2 hours if it's nice to have that strike zone and then Monday morning quarterback it, but what if that machine, that bot sits and calls the balls and strikes, is going to be as fun anymore, right? But so you look at the applications and you talk about the possibilities and where things go. I just one other aside, I spent part of last week at AI World conference, and I put a plug in for the group. It was a great conference. It was both largely sort of commercial sector focused. They have an April conference, a second year this year. They did an inaugural last year for AI World Government in April, I believe, coming back here to DC. But they released a report. I'll give it to Kiran. I know he's a big reader as well. But MIT Sloan and with the Boston Consulting Group put together, released a report that they've been doing in a series over the years, a research report, Winning with AI. And it's interesting as we look at, Jared, as we talk about sort of our government, the sort of the layers and the categories they're in. Interesting little, on the commercial side, they've done the same thing. And one of the areas they talk about are pioneers, investigators, experimenters, and then passive. So if you start going up, passives, experimenters, investigators, pioneers being the top. They say about, so this study they did, it's almost 3,000 respondents. They had 29 industry segments, sectors they looked at, 97 countries. They view that you got a great insight about China and sort of the AI and IA world there in China in terms of what it looks like. But they're saying 20% are the pioneers, organizations that both understand and have adopted some AI principles in those organizations on the leading edge. 30% are investigators, right? Sort of analogous to our sort of emerging area. Organizations that display knowledge and applications but that aren't deploying them beyond the pilot stage. 18% are in that experimenters range, organizations that are piloting or adopting AI without a deep understanding, learning by doing, right? Just sort of diving in and not necessarily a big process. And then 32% passives, organizations with no AI adoption and little understanding of the technology. And the conference last week, I stood back and you looked in, and it was pretty telling for, as you looked at, segments, finance, banking, contracting, pharmaceuticals, services. And they basically said, if you aren't doing in each of these segments, as you went to the breakouts in pharmaceuticals, if you're not doing X, Y, and Z, you're behind, right? And you started to see the faces on some of the firms that were attending, and it was eye-opening to them to see, sort of grade themselves out of where they are or where they should be. Just one interesting other parallel that I draw, because I think we had some debates with folks about, back to Jared's point, is the government ahead or behind? And interesting, they say, that normal thing that says, government's 3 years behind, are we? And you started to look at some of the applications, and you said, boy, that gap is really closing even in the AI world. Because one thing that's happening on the commercial side is, for the first year in their study, is this curve about strategic risk and strategic opportunity. It started out as basically saying, what's the risk? And to them, that risk is, a lot of time, it is survival in the marketplace. It's new companies coming in, right, that don't have the same kind of risk tolerance, right, and they're a little bit more adventurous. And so for the first year, both that strategic risk and that strategic opportunity curve didn't flatten too much, but the risk curve, started to come together, and for the first time, they're meeting. And so the question there becomes is, now what does that do to the projects that are going to be taken off? And a lot of them surmise to say that they think, hey, it's really going to be a huge boom here in the next year to 18 months for firms as they look at that. So I bring that up because I think for us it's the same kind of scenario we talked about. How do we approach kind of our program? Go ahead and we've got a slide right here. Thank you. A little bit about what we wanted to go over. Today we're going to talk a little bit about, Sukumar teed it up for us, our contractor responsibility determination bot. I want to talk a little bit about specifically what we've been able to achieve with that and what it's done for us in terms of identifying other projects and other opportunities. Talk a little bit about a program we've started within the IRS on the contracting acquisition side, Pilot IRS. We're getting our feet wet in there. It's exciting, a little bit scary, but very exciting in terms of what we've been able to generate in terms of an acquisition sort of framework to support us. Talk about quickly an initiative we're working in the RPA space around Data Act improvements initiative that we have going on using Pilot IRS, and then talk a little bit about what's next on the horizon for us. So just here, just a few notes here in terms of, you talk about, how do you get started, right? And clearly we've got the mandates, and we have, as you see here, the mandates and sort of the path forward. For us, clearly it was to look at some of the areas that, towards the bottom there, as we looked across Treasury, as we looked across IRS in terms of both our modernization opportunities in all of the business units, even taxpayer facing, as well as mission support, and then to really drive it into our own strategic plan and procurement. It's key, as Jared talked about, things about, we're not going to do it to folks, we're going to do it, with their support. Critical for us, I think, in that area, because, just a quick aside for us, we've introduced a lot of new systems in procurement as our contract writing system, the core of what we do. And we've had some rocky points in terms of being able to have the functionality. You switch systems, you lose some of that functionality comfort level. So we've got, upwards of 200 and some folks, 250 folks using that system. And we were quick to notice when we started our system that we're not going to call this another system in a sense, right? Because we could sense already the apprehension as you talk about what are you developing, what's going to be in fact, what's going to be the requirement on me? Am I going to have to go out to another system? How is it going to interface and work with with my core contract writing system, my tools that we have in place. So it was key for us to be able to sort of leverage that and talk about really, you know, the opportunity they have and what they can do with our bot. And then clearly talked about the application. Sukumar talked that up for us a little bit in terms of, you know, how do you get started. For us, it was taking a requirement that we all have to do as contracting officers in the federal acquisition regulation around this responsibility determinations. And so we looked at it not only from, you know, moving from, you know, low value to high value work, the actual tasks associated with it, but more importantly, what are the other kind of tangential benefits we're going to see? Things like increased compliance, increased file documentation, increased traceability of our requirements from or acquisitions from one acquisition to the next. And so those were a lot of benefits that we initially didn't quantify, but we quickly saw that we could have some traction on. And not on here, as we talk about sort of the updated AI plan, as you see, a lot of you are probably familiar with this, the June 2019 update. But if you look at the areas that are focused, the ability for us to really have that greater understanding of workforce needs, 7, and as number 8 was added, expanding these public-private partnerships, accelerate advances in AI. I'll let Kieran speak in a couple slides forward here on sort of their approach. I think it's very unique, and when we talk about this partnership, one of the difficulties I think we see on the contracting side, and I won't speak for all agencies here, but I think a lot of it would hold true, is what's different about contracting for RPA work? What's different about contracting for bot technologies in a sense? And there are some differences. And when we go ahead and apply our normal market research techniques, we felt challenged a little bit. So we took a little different approach with this. We attended events like these, right? We got our ears to the ground in terms of what industry is doing in these areas. And as we looked at companies and we were able to structure a requirement, we quickly saw firms like Anika, who were in a situation where they were able to build, invest themselves in terms of some of the core technologies, right? They took the same kind of approach. What are some of those baseline functions that all agencies have to do? And what it did for us is, as we started to do our market research and we saw sort of the maturity level of some of the firms that are doing these kind of functions, it gave us in turn sort of a comfort level to say, hey, we're not starting from a blank slate here, right? We're not starting from just, the traditional, okay, I'm going to do, a couple RFIs, I'm going to put those out, I'm going to get a, myriad of requirements, and then I'm going to sit down there and just try to okay, what are the requirements? So the result for us was about a 6-page solicitation and, a sort of a problem definition statement, and the ability to have firms like Anika come back and just outline that and talk about, not only sort of the methodology for the path forward in terms of developing that kind of capability for us, but sort of the risk level, right? What kind of things we're going to see. And that's critical to what we've built into our pilot IRS program as well. So just a quick visual here for us. Obviously, what we're trying to look at is, as we initially start out and looked at that, I think it's critical for agencies to sort of look at, talk about the home run project. We've got some sort of on the horizon that we see as potential home run projects, both in our procurement space as a customer and potentially across the service. But it's that looking at that class run rules based, right? To get your feet wet, get the ability to say, hey, here's something that we can invest in a fairly low risk environment. Clearly, when we talk about our contractor responsibility, that was totally before we introduced our RPA, it was totally a manual process, really unstructured in the sense of tools we gave CEOs. So they all approached it differently, and hence the ability for us to gain some other advantages. Jared talked about that process analysis. So we quickly looked at it and said, hey, we're able to quickly develop a process largely based on the FAR requirements and largely based on some of the tool sets we've had, and we were able to quickly have a process definition document that supported our activity. And then, as you looked at the Class 2 and Class 3, being able to move out into that area and really develop in the learning and reasoning phases some of the potentially larger payoff and more mature projects. So I think you don't necessarily have to do this left to right kind of continuum for us, but for us we found it to be most beneficial. So just a little description of our bot itself, the Procurement Bot. It's a cloud-based RPA solution. I'll let Kieran talk a little bit about the technical piece of it. But really for us, it's automating all that search and collection analysis and documentation required by the FAR for determining that a contractor is responsible. And that responsibility determination for folks that aren't sort of in the contracting vein, it's about 15 to 20 areas that the FAR specifies that the contracting officers should be looking at on every award to determine if the contractors have, financial wherewithal to perform the contract, they've got a track record of successful performance, there's no adverse actions against the contractor, largely in terms of either exclusions or in terminations, and that they've got a suitable track record. So as you can tell, there's sort of some binary go, no-go factors, right? Are there terminations for cause, convenience, default out there? Are there other exclusions? Are there other violations of federal law or contracting practice through their certs and reps? And then there's the more, what I'd call, you start to look at the class 2 and 3, the more reasoning parts. And that's what we're leaving the door open for our bot to be able to move to that reasoning level in terms of things like past performance and CPARs. And there's some agencies, DHS and some of the others that are looking at that as a capability for RPAs. And what we looked at initially is we said, hey, the ability for us to be able to do this and not have to touch an IRS system. This doesn't go into our contract writing system. It's clearly going out to public-facing SAM and FAPIS websites, and being able to draw information from the CO helped us get a good running start. What does the bot do exactly? It searches, collects, and analyzes these data from these sites, checks for, right off the bat, red flags that we may see, again, in terms of certs and reps or some of the tax clauses, also in some of the areas for any kind of, any other kind of, everything from clean air and water certification to other clauses where they've had to where contractors have to certify. And then it formats this report in a whole sort of time sequencing format for contracting officers, comes back with a zip file of 4 or 5 documents that a contracting officer can quickly read and look at. The most critical one is actually the last document that actually pre-populates and designs probably a form for determining responsibility to about 65–70% completion. And what that does is, it's a huge time save. We looked at anywhere from, some contracting officers, depending again on the number of contractors involved. And as we have more, we do about roughly 4,000 new actions a year. And if you look at the competitive landscape, what the other benefit this was able to do is really get us out of the business of having to have such a serial process for contracting. So a CEO now in our organization doesn't have to wait until the end of an evaluation to begin this responsibility determination. I can introduce that early on in the phase, and I can also, quite honestly, what we're finding is, in some cases, you do this responsibility determination at the 9th or 10th hour, right? Think about it, fourth quarter fiscal year. We're rushing to get awards done, trying to get through things. Something turns up in this responsibility determination that wasn't really known to us. It's not a surprise to say that in a lot of cases, it's not the number one factor that our CEOs go and jump on. They're very concerned initially on getting proposals in, getting evaluations started, getting proposals analyzed, right? Setting up all the other required documentations and determinations and findings and so forth in their file. And so now, the day after proposals come in, our CEO can kick this bot off and run that for everybody that's submitted, and not only get a quick insight into the responsibility of that contractor, but also identify areas that may need additional responses from a contractor, may need additional input, may need additional analysis. And so as you can tell, what that does for us is it just prevents us having those 11th hour snafus where we've got an issue we can't resolve, and it's a binary go, no go for us. So very helpful there to be able to do that. I'm going to let Kieran speak to the next 2 slides. This slide that talks about sort of how the bot works a little bit in terms of how we've structured it. And then also I've got a slide a little bit on the technical specifications. So Kieran, go for it.
Thank you. So the way we approach this is using a true agile methodology to build a minimum viable product. At the same time, we also looked at what's the customer experience that does not require a whole lot of learning, because every time a new solution is built, then you are trying to rebuild or go through a big training to learn that process. So we said, you know what, let us approach it in such an easiest fashion wherein the customer, in this case the CEO in 1102 workforce, would be able to just send an email and get a response back. And we built it as when we showed it to as a minimum viable product, we quickly built it in a attended bot, showed it, and once it was all good to go, we put it in our Azure Gov Cloud and made it as an unattended bot. So once an email comes to our email account, the bot would trigger and run through those two websites, sam.gov, FAPAS, and then produce the output. In this case is a couple of PDFs and screenshots of when this bot ran. So that gives the full audit capabilities. And it also pre-populates a form that a contracting officer needs to fill it before an award will be made. So that's how we approached this. And when we went around and showed it to a couple of users in a pilot, it was very well appreciated. Then we started going around and had some quick users. So this list of, I think maybe 10 12 preview customers, I would say. Then they also gave some good and interesting feedback. But overall, it was the minimum viable product that we built was very well appreciated. So next slide. So RPA as such is all about automating manual and repetitive processes. But there is a lot of, I would say, preconceived notions that includes that this might affect a system internally. That means have to go through a big ATO process. So this is like a non-starter, or it's going to take away a job or that a person is doing. So the way we approach this is, build something very simple that does not have any PII data. That means today I can go to sam.gov and fapas.gov, and whatever I'm doing is just going through a website, copy pasting, downloading and stuff. So we looked at that solution, which could be hosted on a laptop internally, or can be run in a cloud environment. So IRS strategic plan has a cloud initiative. So we thought, why not build this? We as an Azure Gov partner, so we went and built our solution in Azure Gov, and then ran this these two information. So we didn't have PII or anything that is from a security perspective would cause any red flags. So obviously IRS IT organization had some concerns, but when we showed them this is something that we are not doing that has any sensitive data, so they kind of quickly gave an approval, because the only interaction today we have is an email, and we have security very well built in to our network, so that way it just comes to our Azure Gov Cloud, our bot, and it runs and sends an email back. So the sensitivity of the nature was pretty much dispelled. Next slide. Yeah. Okay, I'll leave it to.
Let's talk a little bit. So
benefits is.
Yeah, I think we can sort of tag team this a little bit about some of the benefits. Certainly, from our standpoint, one of the things we were able to see quite quickly is the straight productivity, right? In terms of the ability for the contracting officers quickly to see, that this thing doesn't require, again, it's outside our procurement writing system, contract writing system. They're able to quickly kick it off, get results back, quickly analyze things. It gave them all the documentation really right in front of them, and stopped them from having, you can imagine you get 25, 30, 40 proposals, right? And you've got 25, 30, 40 responsibility determinations to make without really a structure or format. How long would that take you? And more importantly, how distracting is it? Take a contracting officer and he's got to wade through those. again, and has to, concentrate on the ability to be able to formulate that and make a determination. We quickly saw that we had the increased utilization. So it was sort of self-adopting in that sense. I think we've had probably, we're looking at usage reports, and obviously we were able to implement this largely for our fourth quarter push, and saw, upwards of about a 60% trend, probably close to 500 just single hits, not necessarily contractor responsibility determinations, but single requests. Could have multiple requests in there that were done. So, we're now, as the end of the fiscal year, as we move into the next, doing some analysis in terms of, just going back to those folks and saying, hey, what were some of the lessons learned for them as we start to look at it. And quite honestly, one of the things we could have done a little better, I think, is to have a little more robust earlier piloting. We had about 10 or 12 folks that did that, and then we sort of went full scale. And I think one of the things we learned is the folks now that are using it are coming back with, hey, can it do this? Can it do that? So not only do we have, hey, what did you think of the current capability? We've got a list of sort of potential enhancements, and they're starting to look out of the box too. It says, hey, okay, now I got this report. We've got something called folders management, would automatically, or not, doesn't automatically, but we have a structure for storing and archiving all of our contract file documents. And they're saying, hey, now I sent out an email. Can I have a bot to take that and push that into our folders management? Well, you can sort of see where this goes, and it says, okay, well, there's a whole algorithm for where it's supposed to be filed in folders management. And somebody says, well, can a bot do that too? Can't we put the bot out there that that takes the files and knows by the taxonomy what those files are? It's an acquisition plan. Okay, it goes in pre-planning documents in tab 3 on the system, right? And so you can sort of see the cascading effect that we're seeing as we introduce a capability. It's sort of naturally, and most processes I think you're going to find are that way, right? It's maybe not an end-to-end that you're trying to tackle. So when you interject this kind of bot capability somewhere in the process, you quickly realize, okay, there's downstream kind of opportunities as well, and we're seeing that. Just a few things: reduced errors, increased compliance. Really a side benefit. I'll talk in a quick second about the FPDS NG and Data Act requirement that we're working on, but from the standpoint of traceability, auditability, we've had audits in the past that said, hey, if in fact a responsibility determination is made, it's not clearly articulated in the contract file, it's more in the contracting officer's head, maybe there's a quick memo to it, or it's said in passing. And so quickly we bring a mature process in terms of being able to document and show traceability. And then the scalable process in terms of volume, we're seeing that now. We're just able to take the solution that Anika has provided and be able to take it and say, hey, from a scalability standpoint, how do we add capability? How can we add additional functionality to support this? And it gives us a great baseline. And then better informed contracting decisions. I talked earlier about that, the idea of being able to get information sooner that's critical in terms of the award process in the hands of the folks that need to do it, to need to see and act on it, a critical stage. And then a learning opportunity to explore those other RPA capabilities, not only the capability in this requirement, but those downstream. And so I think for us, we're finding it, I think we certainly, if Harrison were here, he would certainly say it is, for as much as we're in contracting, we're in sales, and I think that's true. Sales to our folks in terms of, I use that term in the sense of being able to sort of market and socialize and get folks, to be sort of evangelists around this. And I think for us, being able to take these smaller steps and have folks say, hey, it's not a huge burden on me, one, to the point in the questions about, my job and capability. We've got, any audit will tell you, sometimes the low value work bogs us down, and for our CEOs to be able to say, hey, we're not looking to take FTE away or to reduce footprint necessarily, but there's some high value work that we don't get attention to do in terms of, true negotiations and true contract administration, other kinds of functions that we can redirect when we have this. So big save there. It's certainly not without some challenges and issues. Kieran spoke to a few of them in terms of governance, and we had a question around security. Clearly, some of the enhancements we're looking at trying to do creating APIs for things like electronic subcontractor reporting, another piece of responsibility that we do outside of that. Folks said, hey, why can't we integrate 294, 295 reporting in the system? We also do a separate tax check internally to IRS, so all contract awards beyond the federal level Part 52 clauses. We do an internal tax check on firms that we contract with. So the opportunity, certainly they say, hey, can we do that? Now we're starting, obviously, though, to do that. We're moving into sensitive area information. So we're taking that very cautiously, but trying to look at other capabilities to, again, have an end-to-end solution. And then a huge one here in terms of some of the integration with other tools. Like I said, DHS, I know. Anybody from DHS here? Anybody familiar with sort of CPAR's effort that I know procurement's looking at? Okay, maybe you can speak to that at some point. But I know that's an area we're very interested in. It's I don't know all the details, but it's basically trying to look at, introducing some AI capability in terms of being able for contracting and evaluation teams to be able to quickly get what I would consider to be meaningful, right, and time sensitive past performance information, right? It's in terms of being a capability. We've got a lot of different models that use across the government in terms of surveying, in terms of past performance checks, but being able to have a tool that does that, and quite honestly, that's, it's a fuzzy line between just a straight responsibility determination. Does a company have the ability to do the job, and then quickly going, okay, they do, but what's the recent past performance? So that's a very natural nexus for that. And then just the learning curve, right? And the last two, the internal and external awareness, trying to pay it forward. Looking at the ability for us to be able to put tools in place for our contracting officers and contract specialists that allow them to do their job in a more efficient manner, and then also get the downstream benefits that we have in terms of time savings and in terms of labor hours. Just going to pivot real quick, and I don't want to take I know keep everybody on time here, but Taxpayer First Act of 2019 for us, big focus. Obviously, I won't go into that. It's got a task list all to its own for us across the service, but big focus on customer experience, and a couple things that have touch points here. Mandates IRS creating the strategic vision and plan for really improving customer service in the short, medium, and long term. So you can imagine what that has to do for us, both customers, with procurement, we've got 4 customers, we've got, internal customers, we've got the taxpayer, we've got our business units, and we also have, industry in that sense as being a customer of the requirements we have to do. And so we're, this is a natural fit for a lot of the areas that we have to look at. We've started and got underway 2 or 3 pretty significant RPA activities around, taxpayer facing that we're doing as well. And the design there is to say, hey, obviously with that comes some more challenges, but we want to be able to tackle this both from a mission support, internal operations, as well as on our, what we call our services and enforcement side. Just a little bit, again, that's in the IRS Integrated Modernization Business Plan, 4 modernization pillars. I can make a case that the RPA and BOT and IA activity that we're undertaking have implications in all 4, certainly taxpayer experience and certainly our modernized operations. But I think we're going to see it in the near future across all of our pillars. And then just a couple quick notes about Pilot IRS. So nothing, real magical around the actual contracting tool, but we're really combining just parts 12 and 13 of the FAR, trying to buy like private sector. And currently we're taking a conservative approach and applying that $7 million threshold to that commercial item authority using parts 12 and 13. We, about a year ago, published sort of some guidelines for the program, just in general, to get some traction with 3 primary goals. We wanted to introduce this. We obviously don't have OTA kind of authority and specific R&D budgets, but we wanted to be able to promote innovative responses to challenges that we create, broadly communicate them, and then have a streamlined, really, acquisition process from prototyping to testing to limited deployment. So we put that out, and one of the first projects, we've been working a little bit with some OCR capability that we haven't got as much traction on, but one of the first ones that we actually tried to apply, and Harrison Smith has used the acting senior procurement executive at Treasury, over the summer, we said, hey, this is really has a nexus here. We put out a requirement for agencies, folks that are involved in sort of data accuracy, FPDS, next generation data certifications, and Data Act compliance are probably well aware. There's a lot of effort, a lot of resources put on this process, and manual as well, both in terms of compliance and in terms of corrections. But we had 3 goals when we put this requirement out: improve the data which resides in FPDS-NG, limit the amount of manual rework that we're currently having to do, i.e. corrections and proof of documentation in the system, and achieve some incremental improvement no later than the end of December. So we put out a very short requirement. We released it, trying to remember some of the dates. We posted it in August, awarded it in September, got more than a couple dozen proposals on this effort, boiled it down to a set of awards, and we're currently, we designed a phasing approach in this that we're trying to use across sort of all projects. And we're currently right now on this project, and we just finished phase 1 and starting phase 2 this week. And what we basically did is we said we awarded contracts in phase 1 where we said we're going to give you $25,000 and a 30-day proof of concept, right? You come back to us and show us sort of what you think you can do in that, including some information on ROI. No connection to IRS systems, basically just a proof of concept. And we were able to complete that in the 30 days, and now we're in phase 2, which is a prototype testing and initial kind of deployment. One lesson learned that we quickly had from the requirement that we did on the contractor responsibility bot is, how do you scale, and largely to the federal COP that we're talking about too, how do we share this? So in phases 3 and 4, we left it open for other Treasury agencies and other Treasury offices and bureaus and other government agencies to potentially share in some of this, and we've got some interest already from some agencies that are aware of this, that want to partner with us. So don't want to take any more time on that, but I just want to say this is probably a model that we're going to try to use from an acquisition standpoint, not only necessarily on RPA and AI, but a lot of sort of our, what we'd call sort of our technology challenges and some of our technology and learning environments. We think it's pretty robust. All the feedback we've got from the vendor community, those that participated and those that are aware of it, is they like sort of the battle rhythm that we established in terms of the pacing and the fairly low barriers to entry in terms of proposal costs and in terms of overhead associated with it. So we'll report out on it probably the end of December. We're going to have some couple FBO announcements probably here in the next couple weeks about our progress. So just a quick sort of summary slide. What's next for us? Both procurement and non-procurement use cases, and really looking at advancing across that continuum as I spoke to. So, any general questions for Kieran or I that we could talk about? Good? Good, Diamond? Okay. I want to thank everybody. Appreciate it. Thanks so much.